Kenya is edging closer to a position of debt distress. This is according to both the World Bank and IMF, which reviewed Kenya's risk from moderate to high. Further, the Parliamentary Budget Office warns that Kenya could surpass its current debt ceiling of 9 trillion shillings by 2023. Our parliamentary reporter Patrick Amimo traces the growth of Kenya's debt burden, tracing it back to independence.
In its report titled Unpacking the Estimates of Revenue and Expenditure for 2021-2022 financial year and the medium term, the Parliamentary Budget Office notes that unless action to contain the fiscal deficit is taken, the current debt ceiling of 9 trillion shillings is likely to be breached. By end of March 2021, public debt amounted to 7.34 trillion shillings, representing 82% of the 9 trillion shillings national debt ceiling. This comprised of 3.57 trillion shillings in domestic debt and 3.77 trillion shillings in external debt. The Jubilee administration has in the past been warned against its huge appetite for loans, especially the external expensive commercial loans, to fund budget deficits.
So between 2013 and 2019, we were borrowing expensive debts. We were going Eurobond, we were going commercial debts, which were charging our nation, our country, and our taxpayers 8%, and the resources that we got were misused, either stolen or put in stalled projects.
In November last year, the Treasury announced that the public debt was at 8.4 trillion. If you add the other, whatever they want to borrow, about 700-800 billion before the end of this financial year, they expect to hit the 9 trillion. But in fact, IMF has insisted that the public debt for state corporations and county governments should also be added, another almost 3 trillion. So if you look at it really total, you're talking about 11 trillion already.
Kenya's mean debt to GDP ratio between 1963 at independence and 2015 was 44.5%. The lowest debt ratio of 23.8% was recorded in 1977, with the maximum debt ratio of 82.1% recorded in 1993. Both domestic and external public debt as of December 1999 stood at 502.3 billion shillings. Late President Daniel Moi exited office in December 2002 when the total public debt stood at 629.6 billion shillings. Retired President Mwai Kibaki borrowed 1.2 trillion shillings in his 2 terms in office. In March 2013, when Kibaki left office, public debt stood at 1.8 trillion shillings.
The amount of money Kibaki's administration was taken from donors, for example, the entire donor contribution, for example, in Kibaki budget was never more than 10%. It was always between 5 to 10%. We were financing 90 to 95% of our budget.
President Uhuru Kenyatta has borrowed 5.6 trillion shillings between 2013 and January 2021.
This financial year, we are expected to retire or pay back 1.2 trillion shillings. It is not a mean achievement, because that is the same amount we have provided for current expenditure, and only making available 50% of that amount for development. That clearly demonstrates that we are a country that is borrowing to consume.
We are in a situation where our revenues can no longer service these debts, and the more we borrow, then the more we get into what we call a debt trap. Debt trap means you will now be borrowing money to repay those debts which are maturing.
According to economic experts, the country expects to shoot through the current debt ceiling of 9 trillion shillings by June 2023. Lawmakers last raised the debt ceiling in 2019 from 6 trillion shillings to the current 9 trillion shillings. The government is mulling over increasing the debt ceiling to 12 trillion shillings.
I would not be surprised if Treasury, now under IMF pressure, would ask for a ceiling of even up to 15 trillion. And so it's a major concern, because the reason why it's a concern is the sustainability. We are not able to sustain it. Our revenues are less than 2 trillion, 1.8, and we are supposed to pay 1.2 trillion this year to service debt alone.
It's that kind of mismatch between loan terms and project period and loan terms that has led us into a bulge of repayment, where now the repayment of loans is taking almost 2/3 of the revenue that we collect. We need to get a registrar that would be able to keep an accurate record of all of our obligations, debts, guarantees, and so on.
According to the Parliamentary Budget Office, the increase in debt servicing has outpaced allocations for development expenditure, for which debt is meant to finance, by over 200%, meaning that borrowing for development expenditure financing might no longer be a viable fiscal principle. Patrick Amimo, KTN News.
And a huge chunk of resources in the 2021-2022 budget statement